Hey guys, tonight we sneak inside a massive medieval castle, but not the king's chambers. No gold-plated goblets, no velvet robes, and definitely no personal lute players strumming your favorite Gregorian hits. Nope, you're just another lucky nobody who gets to live, sleep, and occasionally trip over rats inside this magnificent stone refrigerator we call Fortress. And trust me, you probably won't survive this unless you're very good at avoiding ladders, fire, and nobles in bad moods. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little history ride travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's early morning in the castle, and you're already regretting being born in the wrong century. You wake up inside a massive stone structure that smells like old soup, wet wool, and a slight hint of regret. The ceiling drips cold condensation, and someone's toe is dangerously close to your mouth. Welcome to the servants' dormitory, a low-ceilinged chamber with 30 other snoring humans bundled in itchy wool blankets and dreams of not being woken by a bell. The bell rings, loudly, with an urgency that suggests something on fire, though really it just means it's time for another painfully ordinary day. You sit up groggily, your neck crooked from the uneven straw mattress. A chicken has wandered in. Again, you throw on your same tunic from yesterday, which is also your tunic from 3 weeks ago. There's no such thing as a walk-in closet, unless you count walking into the one tunic you own. Your shoes are where you left them last night. Or they were. One is suspiciously missing. It's fine. You limp. The corridors are dark, still lit only by thin daylight slipping through narrow slits in the walls. Arrow loops, technically, but you're not really in the mood to admire defensive architecture. You pass a guard who smells like ale and disinterest. He doesn't even look at you. That's the hierarchy here. You exist somewhere between barn animal and wall decoration. A draft snakes down the hall, like it's looking for a warm body to ruin. The stone under your bare foot, thanks, shoe thief, is slick with something that could be moss, mud, or medieval mystery goo. You don't ask questions. The castle doesn't care. You finally reach the lower courtyard, where the cook's assistant is already shouting about onions. Your stomach growls, but not with excitement, more like dread, because today's breakfast is gruel. Again, you mentally prepare to ingest something with the consistency of wall paste and the flavor of don't ask. But more on that in the next section. The castle, despite its towering presence, is not actually designed for comfort. It's a fortress first, a home second, and a mild torture device always. Walls are thick enough to stop arrows, yes, but they also stop airflow. In summer, it's a stone oven. In winter, it's a giant icebox with drafty corners that conspire against your survival. But it's not all doom and gloom. Someone has set out rushes on the floor, old tradition, meant to soak up spills and smells. Over time, they do neither. They just add texture to your step and serve as nesting grounds for whatever creatures also call this place home. Mice, lice, the occasional bullfrog. You head toward the central staircase, narrow, winding, and clockwise for a reason. You remember that from yesterday's gossip. Spiral staircases curve to the right, so defenders can swing sword with ease as they descend, unless you're left-handed, in which case, sorry. Historians still argue whether this layout actually saved lives or just made everyone slightly dizzy. As you climb, you hear the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Someone's already at work reforging horseshoes or making arrowheads. You'll visit him later. He gets the good bread and weird social status, despite barely saying 2 words to anyone. But for now, you make your way to the kitchens. On the way, you pass the chapel. The smell of old wax and incense creeps out like it has its own feet. You offer a half-hearted nod to the statue of a saint. Maybe St. Dunstan, patron of blacksmiths, or maybe someone more obscure. You don't really know. Nobody told you, and there aren't exactly labeled tour signs. The air is thick with wood smoke from last night's fires, still smoldering. You cough once, then twice, then consider if your lungs are supposed to feel like this. Probably not, but you soldier on, because the bell means you'd better be somewhere doing something, or someone in a fancier hat will notice. You finally step into the outer kitchen, where the cook's apprentice shoves a bowl into your hands with the enthusiasm of someone who's been up since before dawn and already hates everyone. The gruel inside wiggles slightly. That's not ideal. You sit on a stone ledge to eat and watch the sun slink over the ramparts. A pigeon lands nearby and eyes your meal with concern. You shrug, even it doesn't want the gruel. Somewhere above, the lore of the castle is just now stirring, likely into feather bedding and the promise of wine with breakfast. You, on the other hand, just found a twig in your porridge. But still, there's something oddly comforting about this daily rhythm. The castle breathes in its own way. People bustle. Fires crackle. Hooves echo across the drawbridge. There's always noise. Always someone cursing under their breath. Always work to be done. It's not glamorous. It's not even clean. But it's your life, and for some reason, you keep waking up for it. Your day starts in a freezing dormitory with straw in your mouth, a clanging bell, and the faint hope your shoes haven't been stolen again. But now you're up. You've survived the harrowing act of waking in a medieval castle, which is only slightly more comfortable than waking in a ditch full of frogs. Congratulations. Time to go be productive. You shuffle out of the kitchens with your belly full of meal that could charitably be described as wet beige. The sun is fully up now, and with it, so are the rest of the castle's residents. Everyone's heading somewhere with purpose, or at least with enough speed to look like they have won. You should probably do the same. But before you get to your duties, let's talk about your actual morning routine. Not the influencer kind with rosewater mist and yoga, but the medieval kind with wooden buckets, questionable hygiene choices, and prayer mostly out of fear. First, the wash basin. There's one for everyone. It's a large wooden tub filled with water that hasn't been changed since who knows when. You take a freezing scoop to the face, scream internally, and try not to think about who used it last. Soap exists, technically, but it's rough stuff made from animal fat and ashes, and it smells like regret wrapped in lie. You scrub your face, sort of, then under your arms, sort of. That's enough. You don't have a date today, unless you count the pigs you will pass on the way to the stables. Next comes the teeth. You're lucky if you have most of them. There's no toothpaste, of course. Instead, some folks use salt. Others chew on twigs. You opt for neither because you don't have time and honestly, you've stopped caring. There's no such thing as a mirror unless you want to stare into a polished bit of metal and pretend that the smudge you're seeing is your actual face. You run your fingers through your hair, tangled, maybe slightly moving, and decide today's not the day to battle whatever's nesting up there. You slap your coif on, a little linen cap, great for hiding things, and call it done. Time to pray. The chapel bell tolls again, and you join a thin trickle of castle staff heading toward the small stone sanctuary tucked into one of the inner courtyards. You're not deeply religious, but skipping prayers isn't worth the trouble. Plus, it's warm in there from the candles, and the benches are the only smooth with surfaces you get to sit on all day. The priest drones on in Latin while you try to focus. You can't understand much of what's being said, but the rhythm of the chant is oddly soothing. Maybe you'll just rest your eyes a bit. Nope. One of the steward's aides elbows you. Stay awake. Eternal damnation. And all that. Historians still argue whether most lower-ranking castle dwellers took these daily services seriously or just saw them as a time to warm their feet and catch their breath. You fall firmly in the latter category. Your feet are indeed warmer now. Outside again, and the real world hits you like a wet wool blanket. It's loud now. Someone's shouting about firewood. A guard drops a helmet with a clang. A gaggle of children, probably pages, run past, yelling about something called rat jousting. You don't ask. Your name gets called. Loudly. You look up to see the steward pointing. Time for task assignment. This is the moment your whole day hinges on. Will you get something tolerable, like polishing armor in the shade of the barracks? Or will it be something tragic, like scraping pigeon droppings off the chapel roof? The steward narrows his eyes and says the words, scullery work. You sigh. That means dishes. And not in the cozy, sudsy sense. Think. Cauldrons with inch-thick grime, trenchers soaked in meaty sludge, and no gloves. Also, the water's always either boiling or freezing, never in between. But before you get there, you have a few minutes. You walk the long way around the courtyard, stretching the time just enough to not look suspicious. This gives you a chance to pass by the training yard. Here, the young squires are already at it, sweaty, yelling, and swinging wooden swords like their lives depend on it. And honestly, they might. This is the only path to becoming a knight. Get bruised enough as a teenager and maybe, just maybe, someone hands you a sword that isn't wood. You don't envy them. Too much running. Too many blisters. On the other side of the yard, a group of maids are gossiping as they hang damp linen over a rope line. You catch snippets of their conversation. Apparently the lord's niece has been sneaking honey cakes in the pantry, and someone saw a cat give birth in the ale storage again. You reach the scullery. It's dark, damp, loud. Someone's already elbow deep in leftover stew water, and now it's your turn. You grab a rag, square your shoulders, and dive into a trench of dishes that feel like they've been crusting since last Tuesday. One of the castle's quirky little features. The scullery has a sloped stone floor that drains outward through a narrow gap in the wall. In theory, this means the dirty water runs out into the moat. In practice, it sometimes backs up, and you get to play a fun game called Guess What That Smell Is? A spider drops from the beam above into your wash bin. You salute it like a fellow sufferer and keep scrubbing. Occasionally, you pause to watch someone more important walk past, maybe a merchant's clerk or a noble's page carrying a basket of cloth. They smell better than you. Their shoes match. One even has a feather in his cap. Must be nice. Still, you've got your rhythm. Scrub, rinse, stack. Don't think about your hands going numb. Don't think about how long this day is going to be. Just keep going until someone blows a horn or starts yelling or throws a wooden spoon at your head to tell you it's break time. You do wonder, just once, what it might be like to be in the Lord's chambers right now, sipping warmed wine, perhaps being read to from a manuscript you'll never touch, petting a lapdog that smells better than you do. But those thoughts are dangerous. You're not here to dream. You're here to scrub. You trudge to the kitchen for gruel so bland it offends your soul, unless you're important, in which case you get onions. That's right, onions. In the caste system of medieval food, an onion is basically caviar. If you're lucky enough to work close to the Lord's kitchen, or if the cook happens to like your dimples, you might get a thin slice tossed in your morning sludge. A sign, perhaps, that you're moving up in the world. But for you, plain gruel. Again, you hold the wooden bowl like it's something sacred, but you both know it's mostly warm disappointment. Still, in a world where food is fuel and not fun, a full belly is a win. This morning, though, something's off. You lift your spoon and notice a mysterious chunk in the gruel. Is it barley? Bone? Hope? You stare at it, then decide it's probably better not to know. You swallow and move on. The kitchen around you is a chaotic masterpiece. Massive hearts glow with fire, casting shadows on the blackened stone walls. Spits rotate slowly, powered by a tired boy in a turning wheel. Yes, like a human hamster. That's a real job. In fact, historians still argue whether the turnspit boy was the worst gig in the kitchen, or the guy who had to taste the wine for poison before serving a had him beat. You step aside to avoid being splashed by a boiling pot of pottage. The head cook is shouting something about mutton with pride, while scullery maid frantically fans a smoking oven. It's barely breakfast, and already everyone looks like they've run a marathon inside a bread oven. And let's be clear, kitchens aren't glamorous here. They're hot, crowded, loud, and smell like a weird mix of herbs, wet dogs, and fish that might have been fresh a few days ago. You find a corner near a stack of firewood and eat in silence while a cat eyes you from beneath the table, probably wondering if you'll drop anything worth stealing. Above, through the narrow kitchen windows, you catch a glimpse of the high table being set in the great hall. That's where the real food is headed. There The nobles will eat roasted meats, pies filled with things that still had feathers yesterday, and drink wine spiced with cinnamon brought all the way from the east. And here you are, licking your spoon and wondering whether it's possible to drown in porridge. Once you're finished, it's time to clean again. Your bowl goes into a tub with dozens of others. No one gets personal dishware. You're lucky if you get the same spoon twice. But hey, at least it's not made of lead. Some are. On your way out of the kitchen, you're handed a tray by one of the cooks. You're delivering this to the solar. She says, not even looking at you. You take it carefully. It's heavier than expected. Inside are sliced apples, oatcakes, and a small wedge of hard cheese. Luxury items for someone higher up the food chain. The solar is a private chamber, usually reserved for the Lord's family or honored guests. You don't get to go all the way in, of course, just to the doorway. A steward waves you over, and you set the tray down on a bench. You glance inside as you do, just for a moment. Plush tapestries, embroidered cushions, a window with actual glass, wavy, thick, and slightly green but still glass. The air smells faintly of lavender and not of onions, which is saying something. A girl your age, dressed in finer linen than you've ever worn, sits near the hearth, threading embroidery through a hoop. She doesn't look up. You step back quietly, try not to make the floor creak, and walk back down the corridor. Tray empty, stomach not quite as full as you wish it were. You think again about breakfast. It's easy to forget how fragile that first meal of the day is here. If the grain stores run low, if the mill floods, if rats get too bold, gruel becomes a fantasy. You heard last year that a neighboring village had to eat boiled bark for weeks. Boiled bark, with salt if you were lucky. It's no wonder that kitchen scraps are guarded like treasure. Sometimes, the pigs get better leftovers than the servants. Still, there's a strange comfort in the routine of it all. You know where to stand, where not to stand, when to speak, and who to avoid, basically anyone holding a ladle and making eye contact. Outside the kitchen door, you pause for a breath. A group of children run by again, this time with sticks and what looks like a sack of feathers. Rat jousting confirmed. You shake your head and hope they're using fake rats this time. You're not the only one taking a breather. A young woman from the stables leans against the wall, wiping sweat from her brow. Got kicked in the shin, she says casually, like it's part of her morning routine. Maybe it is. You chat briefly, mostly about the weather, which is gloomy and wet, because of course it is. Then you both part ways back to your respective duties. She to the horses, you to whatever the steward throws at you next. One last stop before you're reassigned. The buttery. No, not a room full of butter. It's a cool, vaulted space where the ale and wine are stored. You peek in, pretending you're on an errand, just to get a whiff of the yeasty sweetness inside. It's chilly, dark, and quiet, the opposite of everywhere else in the castle. You stand there for 10 blissful seconds before a stern voice behind you growls, "This isn't a waiting room." You flee before he can assign you to clean out the barrels. So that's breakfast. Not much to write home about, assuming you could write, but it gets you through. The gruel may be forgettable, but the system around it, the noise, the motion, the hierarchy of spoons and onions, it's what holds the castle together. And deep down, you know you'll be back there tomorrow, spoon in hand, eyes half open, hoping maybe this time there'll be salt. Now that your belly's full of oats or something oat adjacent, it's time to get to work. Not the glamorous kind with scrolls and feathers, but real, sweaty, peasant-grade labor. And let's be honest, no matter how medieval castle sounds in your head, the day-to-day tasks are less dragons and more dung. You start in the outer ward, where carts roll over uneven stone, oxen grumble like retired bards, and the air carries that perfect blend of mud, ash, and mystery animal. You've been assigned to help the stable hands this morning. Good news, you like animals. Bad news, these ones don't like you. The stables are just inside the gatehouse, tucked beneath a slanted wooden roof that never quite keeps the rain out. Horses shuffle and snort in their stalls. The straw beneath them soaked through with more than just rainwater. You grab a pitchfork, dig into a mound of muck, and begin what's technically called mucking out. But what you know is, why did I eat before this? The horses watch you work, some with boredom, some with contempt. One chews on your sleeve. You're not sure whether it's affection or appetizer behavior. Historians still argue whether these stables were truly as chaotic as they seem, or if medieval orderliness was simply different. Either way, you step in something that immediately makes you question the meaning of life. The head groom barks instructions while brushing down a particularly large warhorse. This isn't some show pony. This beast is bred for battle, muscles like a wine barrel, eyes like it's seen things. You're told to gather feed sacks from the back corner, which means navigating a gauntlet of tails, hooves, and the occasional rat. You pass a wooden wheelbarrow and a cat sleeping inside it like it owns the place. Honestly, it probably does. While dragging the sacks out, you overhear one of the older stable boys telling a story about a knight whose armor got so rusted he couldn't sit down. You laugh quietly until he mentions the knight lived here. You glance nervously at the rusty suit of armor leaning against the wall and vow never to skip oiling again if that task ever ends up in your hands. But you're not done with stables just yet. You're asked to fetch water for the troughs, about 50 gallons worth. And, surprise, no hose, just buckets. You carry them from the well like some kind of medieval gym challenge. It's shoulder-aching, finger-numbing work. And by the time you're done, your back is whispering things like retirement and donkey cart career. You steal a few moments leaning on the stable door, catching your breath as a pigeon drops something regrettable 3 feet from your foot. That's your cue to move on. Next stop, the workshops. These line the inner bailey like overworked little beehives, each buzzing with its own sounds, hammering, sawing, spinning, swearing softly. You're delivering something to the blacksmith, a bundle of damaged horseshoes from the stables. You half carry, half drag them across the courtyard, grateful for a chore that at least feels important. The blacksmith's forge is a furnace of noise and heat. Sparks fly from the anvil in rhythmic bursts as the smith pounds molten metal into submission. You stand well back, far enough to stay unsynced, close enough to appreciate the sheer drama. He doesn't even look at you when you enter, just grunts. Put him there, and gestures with a soot-blackened thumb. You obey and use the moment to glance around. The walls are hung with tools, tongs, hammers, bellows, and horseshoes in various states of usefulness. A boy maybe younger than you works the bellows, red-faced and determined. His job? Keep the fire breathing. All day, every day, you wonder if he dreams of coal. There's also the Fletcher's hut, a quieter workshop where arrows are assembled with obsessive precision. Goose feathers lie in neat piles beside slender shafts of wood. The Fletcher himself doesn't look up from his bench as you pass. He's threading sinew around a finished arrowhead with monk-like concentration. You think about asking him a question but decide against it. He has the intense focus of someone who may or may not sleep with one eye open. And let's not forget the tannery. Oh, the tannery. You're not even going inside. You smell it from 3 buildings away. There's a sour tang to the air, like vinegar having an argument with old meat. They say tanning hides requires soaking them in a mixture of water and, wait for it, urine. Human urine. Fresh. Volunteers not needed. It turns out. You back away slowly and pray your name never shows up on that roster. As you wander toward the bakery, which at least smells decent, you pass the coopers making barrels and the carpenters smoothing planks with long-drawn knives. Everything has a place. Everyone has a job. And everyone is always behind. A minor crisis is unfolding in the bakery. The oven's gone cold. The baker, red-faced and flour-dusted, barks at a boy to fetch more firewood. You grab an armful yourself and toss it into the stone hearth, basking for a moment in the glow. The scent of fresh bread lingers, warm, yeasty, almost good enough to forget about the rest of your day. Almost. There's one more task for the morning, helping with laundry. You arrive just in time to see 4 women knee-deep in sudsy water, scrubbing linen like it insulted their mothers. The washing area sits near the moat, and they've got a fire going to warm the rinse water. A wooden rack nearby holds cloths that flap in the breeze like surrender flags. You're handed a linen tunic, a heavy brush, and no instructions. You dip it into the basin and begin scrubbing. It's oddly satisfying, watching the water go dark and the fabric go light. Someone starts singing a low, slow melody about a knight who left his armor in the rain. You smile. You've heard worse songs. You've sung worse songs. A spider skitters across the sleeve you're working on. You flick it off without drama. You're a seasoned medieval scrubber now. When the bell finally rings for the midday meal, you stretch your arms and feel the ache in every muscle. Your hands smell like smoke, sweat, and soap made from someone's regrettable recipe. You're exhausted, and it's not even lunch yet. Still, you made it. You worked, you hauled, you lifted, and you didn't fall into the moat. That's a win. You head toward the castle's great hall for the midday meal, legs heavy, arms aching. Stomach's starting to do that hollow drumroll thing again. This meal isn't called lunch. That word hasn't made it big yet. It's dinner, the main event, the centerpiece of the medieval day. And for most people here, it's also the last proper meal until tomorrow. Better make it count. The great hall looms at the heart of the castle like a stern parent, tall, austere, and slightly drafty. You step through the arched doorway into a swirl of noise and smells. Roasting meat, stewed turnips, wet cloaks, spilled ale, wood smoke, and a few things you'd rather not identify. The hall is lit by narrow windows and wall-mounted torches, casting golden flickers over rough wooden tables arranged in long rows. You don't get to sit at those right away, of course. First, it's your turn to serve, because you're part of the lower household staff. Your first job is helping the servers bring in the food. You follow a steward from the kitchens balancing a platter that sags slightly under the weight of something brown, steaming, and possibly pigeon. You place it on the long, high table at the front of the hall. This is where the lord and his family will dine, along with a few hand-picked nobles and maybe a visiting knight or two. They sit on elevated benches like slightly grumpy gods, staring down at everyone else. Their plates aren't plates, really. More like flat rounds of day-old bread called trenchers, meant to soak up the juices and eventually be given to the poor or the dogs. Some lords eat theirs. Some toss them aside. Historians still argue whether the rich actually ate the trenchers, or if that's just a myth wrapped in crust. Back down the hall, the rest of the household is taking their seats. Servants, squires, grooms, even the guy who sharpens the shears. Seating is rigidly hierarchical. If you're new, you eat near the door. If you've worked here for years and know which ladle belongs to which cook, you might get a spot further up, closer to the fire, farther from the draft. You aim for somewhere in the middle. You squeeze between two familiar faces, nod, and grab a slice of barley bread. There's a wooden bowl in front of you, and a pitcher of something thin and warm that might be ale, or oat water, or a creative mixture of both. The meal begins with a prayer, mumbled more out of habit than piety. Then it's elbows out, hands forward, and spoons ready. Plates appear, passed down the tables by practiced hands. There's pottage. Again, a stew of whatever's left from yesterday, flavored with onion, garlic, herbs, and maybe, just maybe, a fleck of meat. A communal pot of cabbage gets shared among 8 people. You spoon out your portion with exaggerated optimism. But wait, there's more. Someone passes down a dish of salt, actual salt, a precious commodity that costs a small fortune and is stored in locked boxes. You're allowed just a pinch, but even that makes the pottage taste like something cooked on purpose. You close your eyes, savor it, and briefly consider proposing to the salt. A roasted turnip clunks into your bowl from somewhere up the table. You don't ask how it got there. You just nod in thanks and bite it like it's a delicacy. Because in this world it is. Across the table, someone tells a joke about a monk, a pig, and a missing flask of mead. It makes no sense, but you laugh anyway. You need to laugh. One of the older grooms swears he saw a chicken climb the stairs to the solar this morning. Looking for better breadcrumbs, he says. You chuckle, then glance around to see if anyone from the kitchens heard that. Servants move up and down the rows with pitchers and platters, refilling bowls, collecting scraps, and dodging stray elbows. Somewhere in the back, a lute player plucks out a tune about a damsel who gets kidnapped and then somehow ends up running a bakery. It's a local hit. A bowl of custard like pudding makes the rounds, a soft mush flavor with honey and herbs. You get a spoonful. You eat it slowly, very slowly. Dessert in a medieval castle doesn't come often unless you're titled rich or the cook's cousin. You savor each bite like it's a finale of a feast, which for you it kind of is. Once the meal winds down, The hall begins to empty. The lord and his party exit first, followed by the knights and nobles. They disappear behind a curtain into their private chambers, where rumor has it they drink wine and argue about maps. You wouldn't know. You, however, stay behind, because there's still cleaning to do. You grab a rag and begin wiping down the boards. The trenchers that weren't eaten are collected for poor. Leftovers go to the pig slop, bones to the dogs. You scrape a burnt onion into the slop bucket and try not to think about how many times you've eaten worse. One of the younger kitchen boys drops a goblet, and it clatters across the floor, stopping at your foot. You bend to pick it up and realize your hands are stained with grease and beet juice. Again, after cleanup, there's a short break. You step outside into the courtyard, hoping the breeze will cool your skin and not bring more smells. A few other workers join you, some lounging on the steps, others dozing on sacks of grain. You sit against a stone wall, tilting your face to the sky. And here's the funny part. Even with the labor, the grime, the weird turnip stew, you feel a tiny spark of satisfaction. A routine survived. A moment of peace. Your belly is no longer hollow. Your limbs, though sore, are working. The bells toll from the chapel tower, 2 long chimes. Time to get up again. There are floors to sweep, fires to stoke, and probably another 50 buckets to carry before you even think about rest. Still, that sliver of pudding stays with you. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow there'll be another turnip. Afternoon settles across the castle like a slightly tipsy guest. Still noisy, still bustling, but not quite as intense as the morning shift. You've already scrubbed, hauled, mucked, served, and cleaned. And now it's time for more scrubbing, hauling, mucking, serving, and cleaning. Welcome to castle life, where every hour is like deja vu wearing muddy boots. This time, you're sweeping out one of the upper corridors that runs along the inner curtain wall. The broom is handmade, more twig than tool, and it catches on every stone crack like it has a personal vendetta against you. The draft in this passage is especially unkind, sneaking up your sleeves and down your collar. You sweep anyway. You always sweep anyway. At least the view is decent. The narrow slit windows offer peeks of the countryside, rolling hills, scattered farms, and a few sheep that seem to be plotting something. Occasionally, a hawk floats overhead like it's judging you. As you sweep, you pass a pair of chatty scullery maids balancing baskets of clean linens. They're arguing over whether the castle priest is hiding a lover in the bell tower. You try not to eavesdrop, but let's be honest, you totally eavesdrop. The bell tower has been off limits lately. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a squire charging down the corridor, a bundle of lances in one hand, a shield strapped to his back, and the look of a man who just remembered he was late to something involving sharp objects. He mutters a half apology before disappearing down the stairs. You continue sweeping. The corridor ends at the armory, a place so filled with dangerous toys. It's amazing children aren't banned from birth. Rows of spears, halberds, and swords line the stone walls. Suits of armor stand like iron sentries in the shadows. You're only here to dust the window ledges, but every clang of metal makes your shoulders tense just a bit. One wrong move, and you're wearing a helmet permanently. The master-at-arms passes by, nods, and grumbles something about polishing the glaives before supper. You nod back like you know what a glaive is. You absolutely don't. Historians still argue whether every weapon in these armories was actually battle-ready, or if many were just for show, like really aggressive wallpaper. Either way, you keep your distance. One of the squires tells you in passing that a sword fell off the rack last week and broke someone's toe. You glance at your own toes. You like them. You like to keep them. The bells chime again. Another hour has passed. You're set next to the laundry yard, where, lucky you, more linens have arrived and the firewood pile needs stacking. You hoist logs onto your back and trudge to the storeroom like a medieval delivery drone. On your third trip, a stray goose blocks your path, hissing like you owe it money. You detour respectfully. It waddles after you for a while. You pretend you don't care. You definitely care. As the sun drifts lower, casting orange streaks over the courtyard, preparations begin for the evening rounds. These include the locking of gates, the trimming of lamps, and your new assignment, tending the garderobes. Yes, That's the castle toilet. There are several of them built into the thick stone walls, essentially vertical shafts that drop waste into pits, or, if you're unlucky, into the moat. You approach the narrow chamber with a bucket of sand, a rag over your mouth, and the sinking feeling that you've made some poor life choices. The wooden seat is damp. The stone floor is slick. You sprinkle sand over the worst of it and try not to breathe too deeply. A spider watches you from the ceiling with the disapproval of a health inspector. You finish your task in record time and back out like it's a haunted tomb. The smell clings to your clothes like guilt. Back outside, you help haul bundles of rushes, dried, grassy floor coverings, into the hall for the evening. These will be spread on the floors to soak up mess, noise, and occasional rodent. A few herbs are mixed in, too, lavender or rosemary, if you're lucky. Today it smells like vaguely mini barn. You lay them out in patterns, not because it matters, but because you enjoy the illusion of choice. Your final chore of the day is restocking the torches and trimming the oil lamps along the passageways. You carry a clay pot of lamp oil and a bundle of cloth wicks, navigating the dimming halls like some kind of sleepy, low-stakes alchemist. The lamps give off a warm, flickering glow that makes the castle seem almost cozy. Almost. One corridor leads you past the chapel, its heavy wooden doors ajar, revealing candlelight dancing on stone. Inside, the priest is kneeling before the altar, whispering prayers for the Lord's health, the harvest, or possibly for shorter sermons. You pause a moment and listen. The Latin is smooth, repetitive, sleepy, like chanting lullabies to a building. You move on. In the west wing, you pass by the solar, the private quarters for the Lord and Lady. You're not allowed in, of course, but the doorway is open just a crack, and you glimpse embroidered cushions, a small harp resting against the wall, and an orange cat stretched across a cushioned bench like royalty. That cat eats better than you do. That cat is also staring directly at you. A guard clears his throat behind you, and you move along quickly. Finally, as twilight deepens, your tasks for the day taper off. There's a moment of stillness in the castle now, a quiet hum beneath the stone and timber, like the building itself is stretching its arms and settling in for the night. Fires are banked. Doors are bolted. The main gate creaks shut with a long, groaning sigh. You head back to your shared quarters, little more than a stone room with straw pallets, stacked cloaks, and the smell of tired people. Your shift is done. Your legs ache like they've been negotiating with the cobblestones all day. Someone is humming a lullaby near the hearth. A dog, probably not supposed to be inside, curls up near your foot. You think about your day, the stables, the kitchens, the pudding, the goose. You lie down on your straw mat. It crunches. And still, somehow, you're already drifting towards sleep. Morning comes again. Of course it does, like an overenthusiastic rooster in the form of bells. You stir from your straw mat, scratch at something that might be a flea, but you don't want to know, and rise stiffly. Your tunic still smells faintly of onion and other things best left unlabeled. Another day, another round of futile fun. But today, something is different. There's a buzz in the courtyard. People are whispering and glancing toward the castle gate. You join the small throng of curious faces peering out from under woolen hoods and wide sleeves. It's a delivery day. A cart rattles in over the drawbridge, pulled by two donkeys who look almost as tired as you. This cart is no ordinary produce wagon. It's the merchant's cart, and that means supplies, and that means a little window into the outside world. The merchant, wrapped in furs and smelling like road dust and potential bankruptcy, hops down with a flourish of someone who knows he'll be paid in more than coins, maybe gossip, maybe favors, maybe both. His cart is stacked with bolts of cloth, jugs of oil, sacks of grain, wheels of cheese, baskets of dried herbs, and, be still your peasant heart, a tiny crate of citrus fruits. Oranges, so bright they look almost artificial, like something out of a saint's dream. The steward steps forward, scroll in hand, and begins ticking off items. You watch from the side, pretending you're not eavesdropping, but really you're cataloging everything. A bolt of scarlet wool for the lady's new gown. 3 jars of honey. The kitchen staff will be bartering favors for a taste. A small pouch of black pepper, worth more than your annual wage. Historians still argue whether spices like pepper and cinnamon were actually used by castle cooks regularly, or if they were kept mostly for display and occasional impress the nobility feast. Either way, you won't be getting a sprinkle, but you do imagine what cinnamon might smell like if it were ever near your porridge. Once the merchant's inventory is confirmed, the unloading begins. This is your job, of course. You and 3 other castle hands form a wobbling conga line of basket carrying, sack hauling, and jug lugging. You nearly topple under a sack of barley flour, but steady yourself just in time, glaring at the donkey who looks unimpressed. As the day unfolds, these supplies are shuffled into their respective corners of the castle ecosystem. The granary swallows the grain. The buttery claims the wines and ciders. The kitchens inspect the root vegetables, some of which are older than your cousin Bertram. A rat scampers out from potato sack and causes minor chaos. The cat is summoned and looks vaguely interested, but ultimately declines to intervene. By midday, the merchant has set up a small display in the outer bailey. He's allowed to sell to castle workers, though only under supervision, and only with permission from the steward. You don't have much coin, but you wander over anyway, because hope is free and browsing is allowed. You pick up a small comb carved from bone and run your finger along its teeth. Imagine your own comb. No more communal grooming tools. You glance at the price. You set the comb down carefully. Next to you, a kitchen maid eyes a pair of wooden shoes with hearts carved into the heels. They'd be ruined in a day, she says, then adds, but I'd look good ruining them. You nod sagely, then pretend to examine a string of glass beads. They shimmer in the light, like dragonfly wings. Someone whispers that the merchant got them from Italy. Someone else swears it was actually Flanders. Someone else says they're just melted sand and lies. The debate simmers, unresolved. You admire the beads anyway. In the background, the merchant's apprentice is attempting to charm the stable boys with tales of city life. He boasts of taverns that never run out of beer, streets filled with minstrels, and sausages as long as a lance. You're skeptical, especially about the sausages. Still, the idea of travel lingers in your mind. What would it be like to leave the castle behind, to walk down a road with no duties and no stew waiting at the end? Historians still argue whether serfs and castle workers actually had any real mobility, or if that was just rare exceptions turned into myth. You suspect it depends on who's holding the scroll. By late afternoon, the merchant is packing up. The steward nods in approval. No complaints, no missing peppercorns, no suspicious haggling. The merchant offers a final wave and climbs onto his cart, kicking the donkeys into motion. The wheels creak away down the path, out through the gate and back into the wide unknown. You watch until the cart vanishes beyond the trees, replaced once more by the slow routine hum of castle life. But something about that visit lingers. That night, as you're folding linens near the fireplace, your hands working on autopilot, you can't help but replay the images. The bolts of cloth, the glass beads, the oranges that smell like distant sunlight. You even daydream about that bone comb. The fantasy is short-lived. A steward passes and reminds you loudly that there's still soot to be swept near the bread oven. Still, the merchant's visit was a breath of something different, a glimpse beyond the stone walls and chamber pots. And that's a rare thing. You go to bed thinking not about trenchers or laundry, but about a world where shoes have hearts carved in the heels and sausages are suspiciously large. Tomorrow, it'll be back to ash buckets, goose droppings, and boiling lye. But for tonight, your dreams smell faintly of citrus. It's another frosty morning in the castle courtyard, and the air smells like chimney smoke and damp wool. You're hunched over a bench beside the stables, mending a tear in your tunic with a needle so blunt it might be classified as a spoon. Your hands are numb, your breath puffs in front of you, and your right foot is asleep. It's not glamorous, but it's a rare moment of stillness until the bell rings again. You stand. You always stand. And off you go, this time to the castle's great hall, which is transformed into a training arena for the younger squires and pages. As you step inside, the clash of practice swords and the bark of the master-at-arms drown out your internal complaints. It's swordplay lessons day. Not for you, obviously. You're here to observe and maybe run the occasional errand, like fetching water or retrieving a drop gauntlet. Still, it's a front-row seat to the medieval version of P, if P involved chainmail and frequent bruising. The squires, usually cocky and loud at supper, are all business now, clad in padded jackets. They square off under the master's watchful eye. One lad fumbles a parry and takes a wooden sword to the ribs. He gasps, and the others wince in sympathy. The master-at-arms shouts something about posture and leading with the hips. You decide never to lead with your hips again, just in case. Historians still argue whether squires truly trained daily with this kind of rigor, or if actual battlefield experience came more from chaos than choreography. From where you're standing, though, it looks intense and exhausting. You notice one squire, barely older than you, practicing with a long sword nearly the length of a mattress. He swings, pivots, and nearly knocks a tapestry off the wall. The master-at-arms yells, "That's not a fish you're gutting, it's a man." The boy flushes red, adjusts his stance, and tries again. Next come lessons in wrestling and grappling. The armor is set aside for now, and tunics are soaked in sweat within minutes. The technique isn't graceful. It's more like two angry scarecrows trying to fold each other in half. But it's surprisingly effective. One lad ends up flat on his back in the rushes, staring at the ceiling like he just discovered mortality. You're tasked with refilling the water pails. As you haul them back, a group of pages passes by, carrying trays of dried meat and stale bread. Lunch time for the trainees. You spot the squire from earlier, long sword guy, sneaking 2 extra hunks of bread. You respect the hustle. After the meal, you slip away to your own short break. You perch on the steps outside the hall, chewing a crust you found in your pocket. It's exactly as dry as you expected. As you gnaw thoughtfully, one of the squires joins you. He's limping slightly, his face shiny with sweat and pride. "Want to trade lives," he jokes. You snort. "Only if yours comes with less sweeping." He grins. "Deal." Then he tosses a tiny wax-sealed note into your lap. "Deliver this to the solar," he says. "Don't let the steward see." You eye the seal. It's marked with a heart and a poorly drawn flower. You recognize the flower. The lady's youngest maid wears it embroidered on her apron. Aha! You don't ask questions. You just nod and tuck the note into your tunic. Here's the thing about castle training. It's not just swordsmanship. It's etiquette, too. You've overheard squires reciting lines of poetry or awkwardly practicing bows that go from dashing to dangerously close to falling over. Apparently, chivalry isn't just about stabbing people politely. It's also about entertaining them afterward. You remember last week when 2 squires were tasked with composing a love ballad as punishment for brawling in the pantry. One played the lute badly. The other sang. Worse. You're still haunted by the line, "Thine eyes are like thistles in morning dew." Romance is clearly a work in progress. Historians still argue whether these chivalric lessons had real influence or were more about nobles playing pretend. But inside the castle, it definitely feels like performance matters, maybe even more than battle, especially when the Lord's daughter is watching from the gallery. After your brief detour to deliver the forbidden note, which you discreetly slide beneath the maid's basket of mending, you return to the courtyard to watch the next phase of training, horseback drills. Now this is something. The castle's small training paddock has been prepared with a straw dummy and a row of ring targets. The squires mount up, armed with lances, and attempt to ride and aim at the same time. It goes exactly as smoothly as it sounds. One rider misses the ring completely and takes out a fence post. Another gets his cloak caught on the saddle and dismounts via a full somersault. You cheer silently. It's the most entertainment you've had in weeks. The horses, bless them, remain entirely unimpressed. They trot in circles, occasionally snorting in what can only be described as judgment. Your job now is collecting stray lances and leading one particularly stubborn pony back into the stables. It resists. You resist back. You both sulk. Eventually, you win by bribing it with a half-carrot from your pocket. A classic power move. Evening approaches. The squires are dismissed, sweaty, muddy, and a little bruised. You help re-rack the practice weapons, stack the wooden shields, and sweep the rushes in the hall. Again, You find a broken practice sword in the corner and wonder if you could turn it into a hair comb. Probably not. You overhear two older squires talking about an upcoming hunt. Apparently, the Lord is planning one next week, and the squires will be expected to join. You wonder if they're excited or terrified. You're definitely leaning toward terrified. Back in the quarters, one of the squires lies face down on his bedroll, groaning. "My arms feel like pudding," he mutters. "Must be nice." You reply, flexing your own sore shoulders. "I am pudding." He chuckles. "Trade lives?" "Still no sweeping?" you ask. "No sweeping," he promises. Tempting. And just like that, another day of castle life winds down, a little heavier on bruises and secrets than usual. You fall asleep, wondering what it might be like to ride a war horse or write a terrible love ballad. Either way, you'd definitely still be pudding. The morning fog clings low across the outer yard as you shuffle, half awake, toward the kitchens. Your shoes are already damp. How does do get inside shoes? And your shoulder aches from yesterday's lance-fetching adventure. But none of that matters now. Today's task is sacred. Well, sort of. You've been drafted to help in the castle kitchens. And that means fire, knives, and terrifying cook matrons who can smell laziness from 3 rooms away. The castle kitchen isn't exactly the cheerful, herb-scented paradise some imagine. It's more like controlled chaos. The hearth dominates the space, large enough to roast a whole pig. And sometimes it does. Pots the size of cauldrons bubble with mysterious things. Some of them are food. Others might be experiments. A scullion mutters that one kettle's been boiling for a month straight and has developed sentience. You laugh nervously. You're not entirely sure he's joking. First order of business. Prep the bread. Not bake it. That's done in the bakehouse, which is its own smoky little kingdom of flour and sweat. No, your job is to sort through yesterday's loaves and slice them into trenchers, flat, sturdy hunks of bread that double as plates. They're slightly stale, and occasionally sport greenish corners you're supposed cut off discreetly. You try not to think too hard about it. Bonus. When the trencher soaks through with stew or gravy, it gets thrown to the dogs, or eaten by whoever's closest. Sometimes that's you, while you saw away at a loaf using a knife that predates you by several decades. The head cook storms by. She's short, wide, and wields a wooden spoon like a knight with a broadsword. Her name is Maud, and you know better than to cross her. She once banished a lazy apprentice to peel onions for 3 days straight. That apprentice now cries at the mention of soup. You're assigned to root vegetable duty, which sounds simple but is somehow a full-contact sport. The turnips are stubborn, the carrots are unyielding, and the parsnips are shaped like medieval riddles. You chop, peel, and dodge the occasional flying potato. Historians still argue whether medieval castle meals were truly as grim as popular culture suggests, or if the nobility dine on unexpectedly exotic fare. For you, it's mostly pottage. Always pottage. A stew-like slurry of whatever's available, heavily relying on onions, beans, and disappointment. On rare occasions, they toss in bacon. When they do, the entire castle smells like hope. At one point, Maud bellows for salt. There's a moment of panic. Salt is expensive, sometimes kept under lock and key. You fetch the coarse, grayish stuff in the pantry, guarded like it's powdered gold. A pinch here, a pinch there, too much, and you'll be scraping burnt pottage out of the cauldron all evening. Next up, meat. And no, not the roast swan or wild boar the nobles like to boast about. That's for feasts. Today, it's salted fish and maybe some pigeon. The kitchen boy in charge of plucking birds is covered in feathers, and there's an odd smell radiating from the meat bench that suggests it's been a long week. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some castles reportedly had eels kept alive in barrels to ensure freshness. Yes, eels. Slimy, wriggly, possibly judging you from inside a wooden tub. You haven't seen any, thankfully, but you've heard tales. And once you swear a sausage blinked at you, so anything's possible. As the meal begins to take shape, you help skewer the fish and turn the spit slowly over the fire. Your eyebrows roast. Your hands sweat. You wonder if the fish were happier before they met you. Mid-morning, the lady of the castle sends down a request. A mild broth for her ailing cousin, who's taken to bed with vapors. which could mean anything from a hangover to a dramatic sigh. A pot of thin herb liquid is whipped together with leeks, garlic, and something Maud refers to only as the good root. You're not allowed to ask questions. You carry the bowl upstairs with great care, praying not to trip. You don't. Small wins. The noontime meal is chaos. Plates clatter. The kitchen pulses with steam, shouting, and the sounds of 15 separate tasks being half completed at once. Maud orchestrates it all like a general in a flour-dusted apron. The servants get their meals first. Pottage and trenchers again. Then, once the dust settles, you help plate the nobles' food. Their dishes are elaborate. Not just meat and bread, but tarts shaped like animals, sauces so bright they look artificial, and sugar-dusted fruits from far-off lands. It's a bizarre contrast to your own meal, which you could accurately describe as brown. You ferry plates to the solar and dining hall, practicing your poker face as you pass between rooms. One moment you're surrounded by spitting cauldrons, the next by silk gowns and harp music. You'd think the smells would linger, but your nose has gone numb to everything except burnt onions. Historians still argue whether castle kitchens really produce this level of culinary diversity daily, or if it was mostly showed during feast days. You're here to tell them it's mostly onions. 1,000 ways, all of them tear-inducing. After the meal rush ends, cleanup begins. That means scraping dishes, emptying slop buckets, and swearing vengeance against the one guy who keeps putting fish bones in the grain bin. You spend an hour elbow deep in greasy water, pondering the meaning of life and wondering if anyone really enjoys pheasant or if they're just pretending to be fancy. At the end of the day, the fire's embers glow low. You help store the remaining bread, sweep the hearth, and sneak a shriveled apple into your pocket. You pass Maud on your way out. She grunts something that might be approval or indigestion. Either way, it feels like a compliment. You trudge back to your corner of the world, smelling of wood smoke and cabbage. Your hands are blistered, your tunic has developed new stains, and your spine has lodged a formal complaint. But somehow the day feels full, like a pot that didn't boil over. You curl up on your mat, stomach full, eyes half shut, wondering what tomorrow's pottage will bring. Probably onions. You wake to the sound of rain, not a gentle sprinkle either, but the kind that soaks through your cloak in under a minute and makes the very stones of the castle weep. You stare at the gray sky through a sliver in the wooden shutter, watching droplets streak down like the castle is crying, because even it knows what day it is. Laundry day. It's true. Even in a medieval castle, someone has to wash the clothes, linens, and all those mysterious rags that accumulate in odd corners. That someone today is you. You trudge to the laundry yard behind the castle walls, a space suspiciously close to the pig pens. There's a low stone basin, several barrels of cold water, and enough lye soap to strip the color from your dreams. A group of washerwomen is already there, sleeves rolled, arms elbow-deep in grayish suds. They greet you with a mix of amusement and pity. One of them hands you a paddle. It's not for rowing. First comes the soaking. Shirts, undergarments, stockings, and an entire forest where the sheets are dumped into barrels. The water is cold enough to stun a dragon. Then comes the scrubbing, where you discover that medieval lye soap is roughly as gentle as volcanic ash. Your knuckles protest. Your wrists stage a small rebellion. You pound the clothes against a washing rock, the slap-slap rhythm echoing across the yard like you're sending coded messages to another galaxy. You wonder the nobles ever think about who washes their linens. Probably not, unless there's a stain. Then suddenly it's a castle-wide emergency. Here's a mainstream fact. Medieval hygiene was entirely as horrifying as modern myths suggest. People did wash, just not every day, and linen, in particular, was considered essential to keeping clean. Changing into fresh underclothes was believed to draw dirt and sweat away from the body. So, naturally, laundry mattered, even if it broke your spine. Rain continues to drizzle as you rinse each item in a second barrel. Wring it out with your hands and hang it on lines strung between wooden posts. The wind is unhelpful. So is the goose who's taken up residence by one of the buckets. He stares at you like you owe him money. One of the older washerwomen tells a story about a nobleman who insisted his shirts be washed in wine. You're not sure whether to be impressed or horrified. You ask what happened when they ran out of wine. She winks. He smelled like vinegar for a week. Historians still argue whether such excesses were widespread or mostly exaggerated anecdotes passed down through disgusted servants. You're leaning toward probably true, based on the sheer number of spoiled meats you watched the Lord insist were perfectly edible. By midday, your arms are noodles and your fingers look like prunes that lost a fight. You're sent inside to help with the drying room, which is really just a narrow stone corridor near the kitchen where heat rises from the hearth below. Laundry is hung across wooden racks, and the air smells like smoke, socks, and regret. You pass a noble chemise embroidered with tiny golden threads. It looks so delicate, you're afraid breathing near it will make it unravel. In contrast, one of the guards' tunics is so stiff with dried sweat you're fairly certain it could stand up on its own and apply for a job. Then comes the folding. And ironing, yes, they iron sort of not with steam or fancy devices, but with heavy glass or stone smoothers, heated near the fire and pressed down until wrinkles cry for mercy. You help with that too, and manage to only burn yourself once. A new personal best. After a late lunch of, you guessed it, cold pottage and hard bread, you're given a new assignment, sorting lost and found. Or, more accurately, the weird stuff people leave in laundry baskets. You find a wooden hair comb carved with initials, 3 mismatched gloves, a pair of socks that clearly belong to someone who believes in never washing socks, and a love poem written on the back of a fish recipe. You keep the poem. It rhymes Lance with romance, which deserves preservation. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some castles, particularly large ones, laundry was so central to daily function that entire teams of washerfolk lived nearby, often passing their skills down like a trade. Being a washerwoman wasn't glamorous, but it was a steady place in the castle economy, and often a deeply social one, which makes sense, given how much gossip gets aired with the linens. By late afternoon, the sun peeks out just enough to dry the edge of a tablecloth. You take a moment to stand in the brief warmth, eyes closed, listening to the chatter of the women around you. One's telling a scandalous tale about a knight's underpants. Another sings a lullaby to the baby strapped to her back. The smell of soap and smoke and damp will become almost homey. Historians still argue whether servants in castles experience camaraderie or cutthroat competition. You're here to say both. But on laundry day, it's mostly camaraderie, or maybe collective suffering. Either way, someone always brings boiled cider, and you're not complaining. Just before dusk, a shout from the castle's western tower. Someone's dropped a curtain into the moat. You don't ask how. You just join the unlucky group sent to retrieve it. The moat is as welcoming as ever, greenish, muddy, and possibly sentient. With long poles and even longer curses, the team drags the soggy fabric back to dry land. It smells worse than the fish recipe. You're absolutely not touching it again. Back inside, the last of the laundry is folded and stashed in wooden chests. You deliver a bundle to the knight's quarters, where one of them thanks you by flipping a copper coin your way. It bounces once, rolls under a bench, and is instantly lost to history. You return to your corner with hands raw and spine aching in ways you didn't know were possible. But as you settle under your scratchy blanket, the castle is quieter than usual. The nobles are off hunting, the guards are fed and sleepy, and the only sound is the rain returning, soft against the stone. The linens are clean, the tunics are dry, and your hair, somehow, still smells like turnips. The castle is oddly quiet when you wake. Not the usual clamor of boots on flagstones or someone shouting about a missing goat. Just a soft hum of voices echoing in the chapel corridor and the occasional clink of metal buckles being fastened. It's not a feast day or a market run. It's church day. Technically, every day is church day in the Middle Ages. Religion is stitched into everything, meals, farming, illness, and definitely guilt. But today is a little different. It's a holy day, one of many on the liturgical calendar, and that means the castle grinds into a new kind of motion. Slower, quieter, more pious in theory. You're sent to the chapel early, before the lords and ladies arrive. The stone chamber is cold, the floor damp, and the air smells of incense and beeswax. You carry fresh rushes to scatter along the floor, an old practice meant to soften the steps of nobles and soak up smells. You're told to arrange them neatly, which is hilarious given that rushes are basically medieval carpet shrapnel. Candles are lit, icons polished, and the altar cloth smoothed of every wrinkle. You take a moment to admire the stained glass window above the altar. It catches a gray morning light and filters into soft pools of color, reds and blues that flicker gently across the stone like painted smoke. Here's a mainstream fact. Medieval castles often had their own chapels, even modest ones, to ensure daily mass could be observed without the inconvenience of walking to a village church. The Lord's soul depended on it, and maybe more importantly, his reputation. Once everything is ready, the rest of the castle begins to file in. Nobles take front row seats, looking slightly more polished than usual. You know for a fact one of the knights rinsed his hair in rose water this morning. Behind them, stewards, kitchen workers, grooms, and you stand or kneel, back stiff and eyes heavy. The chaplain begins to chant in Latin. You don't understand much. Some words, maybe Pater Noster or a Pro Nobis. It's beautiful, though. The cadence, the echo. It fills the chapel in a way that makes even the drafty stone feel sacred. Halfway through, your stomach growls. Loudly, a maid beside you snorts. You pretend it was divine thunder. Historians still argue whether the lower ranks of castle staff truly found spiritual meaning in these rituals or simply endured them out of obligation. You're not sure where you fall. Somewhere between awe and boredom. The service is long, and your knees are very much made of mortal materials. There's a brief sermon, mercifully short today, perhaps because the chaplain knows better than to drone on in front of hungry nobility. He speaks of humility and service, which is ironic given the gold thread in his robes. Still, his voice is soft and calming, and you find your eyes drifting closed once or twice before snapping awake to the judgmental stare of a page 2 pews over. When the service ends, there's a hush of collective relief. People file out slowly, some more reverent than others. One of the nobles whispers something clearly not about the gospel. Laughter follows. You suspect even saints would roll their eyes at this bunch. After Mass, a small group of nobles gathers in the solar for prayers and more discussion, of spiritual matters, of course. You, meanwhile, are sent to help set up for the midday meal. Church days don't mean skipping food, but before the kitchen duty begins, you're diverted, literally grabbed by the sleeve by the chaplain's assistant. He needs help preparing one of the missals, a large book used in Mass that has suffered from too much page-turning and one unfortunate candle incident. You follow him to the scriptorium. Well, it's not exactly a scriptorium, just a quiet corner near the library tower, where books are stored in locked wooden chests. Inside, it smells like vellum and damp wood. Quills and ink pots line the table, and there's something soothing about the scratch of nib on parchment. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many medieval castle chapels had at least one illumination enthusiast, someone who decorated manuscripts with tiny, glorious illustrations, and occasionally bizarre ones. There's a famous image of a knight battling a snail. Why? Historians still argue over the symbolism. The snail may represent cowardice, or sin, or possibly just a very weird Tuesday. You help carefully paste a damaged page back into the binding, guided by the chaplain's assistant. It's delicate work, and for a brief moment, you forget the stiffness in your back and the chill in your bones. There's something calming about caring for a book that survived more winters than you have. Lunch is quieter than usual, with meatless dishes on the menu out of religious respect. Mostly beans, bread, and dried fruit. No one complains too loudly, at least not within earshot of the chapel. You eat in the courtyard, trying to soak up a bit of sun between clouds. In the afternoon, the chapel hosts confession. You're not involved directly, thankfully, but the gossip that follows is rich. One maid insists she heard a noble confess to kissing someone entirely inappropriate. The stable boys spend the next hour speculating. You help sweep the chapel, polish candlesticks, and refill the oil for the sanctuary lamp. At one point, you catch the chaplain himself snacking on figs behind a curtain. He sees you. You both nod. It's understood. Figs are holy if you're fasting. As evening draws in, there's another shorter service, Vespers. This one is easier to follow, with more music and fewer sermons. The candles flicker softly in their sconces, and the air grows warm with the scent of wax and hope. You find yourself singing along, very quietly, to a hymn you've heard so often it's etched into your bones. And here's something worth remembering. For all the grumbling, the stained knees, and the stifled yawns, this part of castle life offers something unique. Stillness, reflection, a brief moment where no one is demanding trenchers or chamber pots or firewood. Just breath, song, and stone. As Vespers ends, you linger in the doorway a moment longer than necessary. The last note hangs in the air like a bird that hasn't quite decided whether to land. You take it with you as you step out into the cool evening, the chapel behind you glowing gently in the dusk. It may not be the loudest part of castle life, but here, in the hush and flicker, is a kind of peace, until someone yells about missing goats again. You sigh and start walking. Your day starts with a slap of cold air and the unmistakable sound of hooves, many hooves, which, considering you're in a castle and not a stable, means one thing. It's training day for the young squires. And where there are squires, there's chaos. You barely pull on your boots before someone shoves a wooden pail into your hands and tells you to bring water to the tilt yard. You don't argue. Squires have a tendency to swing first and apologize never. The tilt yard is where the future knights of the realm try not to kill each other in practice. Mostly. Sometimes. It depends on the mood and the phase of the moon. The yard is already a flurry of padded armor, wooden swords, and loud declarations of, "That was a fair hit," followed by, "No, it wasn't, you cheating turnip." A knight overseeing the training blows a whistle made from some unfortunate animal's horn and tells the boys to line up. They don't. They sort of gather in a diagonally chaotic line that leans aggressively to the left. Your job? Make sure no one faints, overheats, or impales themselves unnecessarily. Here's a mainstream fact. Knights weren't just born into armor. They trained for years, starting as pages around age 7, then graduating to squires in their teens. Squires lived, ate, and suffered under the same roof as their lords, and were expected to do everything from cleaning armor to learning combat to fetching wine for guests. So, basically very sweaty interns with swords. You weave through the mayhem with your pail, trying not to get clipped by flailing wooden weapons. One squire, too eager for glory, charges his opponent with a war cry that sounds suspiciously like "for biscuits." They both end up face down in the mud. After a few rounds of sparring, they move on to the real draw of the day, jousting practice. Now, actual jousting with full-speed horses is rare and dangerous, so today's version is more like budget jousting. A heavy post with swiveling dummy, called a quinton, stands at the end of the yard. The goal? Ride at it with a practice lance. Hit the shield dead center, and avoid getting smacked in the face by the spinning arm. Simple. In theory, you watch as the first squire charges, hits the quinton, and promptly gets whacked in the back of the head by the counterweight. He topples off his horse like a sack of barley. The others cheer, because of course they do. You help dust him off. He's fine. Probably. You hand him water and a hunk of bread as consolation. He immediately uses the bread to mop mud off his face. He's not the brightest candle in the chapel. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some quintons weren't just for practice. They were community entertainment. In certain towns, local fairs would feature peasants trying their luck against a spinning dummy. Winners got bragging rights. Losers got bruises. And the audience got free comedy. Historians still argue whether squires truly followed a rigid training schedule or if much of their time was dictated by the personality of their supervising knight. Judging by today's chaos, you'd guess the latter. One knight encourages strict repetition, barking orders like a drill sergeant. Another lets a squire duel a scarecrow for confidence. The scarecrow wins. You're soon recruited to help with the archery setup, which is castle speak for go stand very far away and hope no one accidentally shoots you. Bales of hay are dragged into position, and painted targets are pinned on. The bows are slightly warped from last winter's damp, but the arrows are sharp enough to worry you. The squires line up and take turns firing. Most shots go wide. One arrow hits a tree. Another lands about 3 feet behind the archer. You're not sure how that's even possible, but you're impressed. Then comes the horse work. Not just riding, but caring for the animals, brushing coats, checking hooves, cleaning tack. A few squire pretend they've done it all before. They have not. One accidentally saddles a horse backward. Another forgets to tie the reins and ends up chasing a runaway mare halfway across the lower courtyard. You're sent to retrieve said horse. Her name is Moonshine, and she has zero interest in being caught. You chase her past the chicken coops, around the stables, through a group of startled monks, and finally corner her by the laundry lines. She looks at you like you messed up her morning. Eventually, you lead her back with the help of a turnip, one of the stable's best-kept secrets. Horses, it turns out, love turnips. She follows you like a dog, munching happily. After the riding practice, there's a demonstration of armor fitting. The squires gather around as a senior knight dons a full suit of chainmail and plate. It takes 4 people in at least an hour. You're asked to carry the greaves, leg armor that weighs more than your torso. One of the squires jokes that knights have the muscle of bulls and the brain of cabbages. You don't disagree. Once the armor's on, the knight clanks around like an angry wind chime and attempts to swing a sword. He can barely lift his arms. The squires laugh. He glares. Silence returns. By mid-afternoon, bruised and breathless, the squires collapse under a tree to eat boiled eggs and apples. You sit nearby, trying to pick straw out of your hair. One of the boys asks you if you ever want to be a knight. You think about it, about the armor, the danger, the never-ending drills. You shake your head. I like my limbs where they are. But in truth, watching them, mud-streaked and grinning, shouting stories, dreaming of dragons and glory, it's hard not to admire them just a little, even if they're still technically children with weapons. As the sun starts to dip, training winds down. You help gather the practice swords, coil the bowstrings, and brush down the horses one last time. Moonshine licks your sleeve and tries to eat your hat. You let her. The squires trudge back toward the castle, louder now, their bodies aching but their spirits high. Tomorrow, they'll polish boots or run errands or scrub chamber pots. But today, they were almost knights. And you? You walk behind them, sore and sunburned, but smiling. Because even in a castle filled with chores and chaos and mystery stew, watching someone swing a sword at a scarecrow never gets old. By now, you've grown used to castle rhythms. Bread baking at dawn, pigs squealing at inconvenient hours, and squires yelling about missing socks. But today, something odd is happening. There's a hush in the corridors, a strange tension in the air, and a guard at the main gate is polishing his helmet, voluntarily, which can only mean one thing. Visitors are coming, and not just any visitors. Important ones. Possibly noble, possibly nosy, definitely judgmental. Word spreads faster than fire in a hayloft. The castle erupts into a flurry of preparation. You're handed a broom and pointed toward the courtyard. Make it sparkle, someone says, as though anyone can sparkle cobblestones. You sweep anyway, dodging chickens and wondering why visitors always arrive after a rainstorm. Here's a mainstream fact to tuck away. Medieval castles weren't just offensive structures. They were social and political hubs. Nobles visited each other for alliances, marriages, grievances, and occasionally just for the stew. Hosting them meant putting on a performance. Clean floors, fattened pigs, and smiles that didn't suggest you were thinking about throwing them off the battlements. You're sent next to the Great Hall to help arrange benches and light torches. The good ones. No smoky rushlights today. We're going full beeswax. The tapestries are shaken, silver is polished, and someone tries to scrub a soup stain off a ceiling beam. You don't ask how soup got on the ceiling. Outside, a group of servants in nicer tunics than usual stand waiting near the gate. You join them just in time to hear the approaching clop of hooves and the squeak of a heavily laden cart. A party of travelers rides into view, half a dozen on horseback, plus attendants and baggage. One horse is adorned with tiny bells. The rider looks insufferably proud of that. Their clothes are rich, the kind that makes you instinctively check your fingernails and wonder if you smell like turnips. Probably. You help unload luggage. One chest is labeled linens delicate, Another just says wine in very large letters. Priorities. The guests are greeted by your Lord Steward, who bows so low his back might never recover. Formal words are exchanged, pleasantries that sound like compliments but could easily be backhanded. You carry bags upstairs and try not to trip on the runner rug, which has been freshly beaten and is now full of spite. One of the visiting attendants asks if the tower rooms get decent morning light. You do not laugh. You just point them toward the east windows and hope they enjoy the sound of pigeons dancing on the roof. Soon, preparations shift from cleaning to feeding. You're sent to the kitchens, which are now a vision of barely contained chaos. Everyone is yelling. Flour is flying, and someone's trying to pluck a goose that absolutely refuses to be plucked. Here's your quirky tidbit. Castle kitchens often had an assigned food taster, usually someone of lower status who sampled the dishes first to ensure they weren't poisoned. Today, you're very much hoping that's not your job, because the visiting lord has brought his own cook, and his cook is suspiciously quiet. Still, the food smells incredible. Roasted fowl with herbs, fresh tarts with honey, and actual spices, not just pepper, but cinnamon and cloves. You didn't even know cloves were real. The castle is trying to impress. The meal is served in the great hall with all the pomp of a royal affair. You're tasked with carrying in dishes and refilling wine goblets. You move quietly, expertly now, like a shadow with very tired feet. The visitors comment on the tapestries. They pretend not to notice the cracked stonework or the draught near the high windows. The steward beams with pride every time someone says quaint. Historians still argue whether noble guests were treated with genuine hospitality or more like potential threats. Castles had to walk a fine line. Too friendly, and you seemed weak. Too cold, and you risked offense. Today, the vibe is polite tension wrapped in cinnamon glaze. You manage to steal a bite of honeyed carrot between courses. It's divine. You might weep. After the meal, entertainment begins. A troupe of traveling performers, coincidentally also visiting the area, is brought in. They juggle, sing, and act out a highly exaggerated tale involving a noble lady, a talking goose, and a very confused baker. You don't get the plot, but the noble lady laughs so hard she snorts, which is its own reward. One of the performers pulls you into a dance. You panic. You're not a dancer, but your feet remember the rhythm somehow, and soon you're spinning in circles, laughing with a belly full of vegetables that were not boiled to death for once. The visitors cheer. One raises a goblet to you. You bow, dramatically nearly fall, and recover like you meant to do it. As the evening winds down, wine flows freely. People loosen their tunics, their masks of etiquette, and their opinions. A visiting knight brags about defeating 10 bandits with a single blow. Someone mutters that it was probably chickens, not bandits. You don't ask. Later, when the guests are finally shown to their rooms, some grumbling about lumpy straw mattresses, others too tipsy to care. You help clear the hall. Plates are stacked, bones scraped into buckets, candles snuffed. The fire crackles low, casting long shadows across the now empty benches. You're exhausted. Every joint protests. But there's a weird satisfaction in it. Hosting nobles is like taming a storm with a silver tray and a smile. And you did it without spilling gravy on anyone's lap. This time, you finish the night helping a stable hand settle the visitors' horses. The animals snort and stomp softly, their breath steaming in the night air. Moonshine, ever nosy, sticks her head into one of the visiting carts and emerges with a ribbon in her teeth. You pat her affectionately and take the ribbon before she eats it. Walking back to your quarters, the castle feels different, warmer, buzzing with the aftermath of too many stories, too much wine, and just enough mischief. Visitors bring that kind of energy, momentary disorder, in a place that usually runs on routine. You lie down, bones heavy, feet aching, head full of snatches of songs and overheard gossip. Maybe tomorrow you'll find out if the linen chest really held linens, or something far more scandalous. But for now, you let the quiet take you. The castle breathes deep content in the afterglow of polite chaos. You wake to a rooster doing its best impression of a creature being slowly stepped on by a cow. A few castle guests are still sleeping off their indulgences, but for everyone else, especially you. It's back to the routine grind. No more sweet wine and dancing, just mud, buckets, and vague existential dread. But today there's a twist. You've been reassigned to something ominously called tower duties. No one explains what that entails. Someone just hands you a ring of keys and points upward, as if you're expected to scale the battlements like a squirrel. You climb stone steps that spiral, so tightly your knees protest. These towers weren't designed for comfort. They were designed for defense and, apparently, cardio. The tower you're headed to serves a variety of purposes depending on the day and the level of pest infestation. Some days it's used for storage, others for observation. And sometimes, when a local magistrate is in town, it's used as a makeshift jail. You pause halfway up and remember that last month's thief, a wiry man with too many teeth, might still be up there. Mainstream fact break. Castles weren't just homes or fortresses. They were administrative centers. Lords were responsible for justice within their lands, which meant handling disputes, crimes, and the occasional goat-related lawsuit. The tower doubled as both a courtroom and a holding cell. Justice, medieval style. At the top, the air shifts, colder, thinner, tinged with mildew and pigeon ambition. You find a guard perched on a stool outside a narrow wooden door. He gives you a nod that says, "If anything weird happens, I'm pretending I didn't see it." Inside is a small, round chamber with a barred window, a bucket, and a straw mattress that crunches ominously. There's also someone in it, and that someone appears to be arguing with a potato. You clear your throat. The prisoner, who, to your relief, is not dangerous but just deeply eccentric, stares at you like you're the hallucination. He announces that he's on a hunger strike unless someone brings him gooseberry pie. You mentally add find gooseberries to your to-do list, right after avoid talking to potatoes. You drop off water and bread, which he accepts grudgingly before launching into a lengthy monologue about royal conspiracies and how the pigeons are watching, which you can't entirely disprove. Down the stairs again, knees wobbly, you're reassigned to the upper parapet for the midday watch, which sounds noble, but really means you're standing in the wind staring at nothing in particular, praying the weather doesn't change. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some castle lookouts would chew on raw onions during their shifts to keep alert. You try it. Regret sets in immediately. Your eyes water. Your tongue burns, and you can't tell if you're more awake or just mildly suffering. The view, at least, is spectacular. Rolling fields stretch toward the horizon, broken by small villages, patches of forest, and the occasional smudge of chimney smoke. You can even spot the river glinting in the distance, winding lazily as if it's got nowhere to be. Unlike you watch a pair of stonemasons patching a crack in the outer wall, using lime mortar and muttered curses. One of them throws a hammer at a bird that won't stop chirping. He misses. The bird wins. Historians still argue whether castle towers were manned constantly or only during periods of actual threat. You suspect it depended on the number of board soldiers available and how many onions they could stomach. A bell rings from the chapel below, a slow, solemn toll. Not an emergency, just a call to midday prayer. You're excused from watch duty and told to help carry supplies to the solar. That's the Lord's private living quarters, usually located in the upper stories of the keep. It's warm, quiet, and surprisingly well decorated. Thick rugs, carved furniture, and windows with actual glass panes. Fancy. You shuffle through with bolts of cloth, a basket of lavender, an odd item that may or may not be a decorative hat stand shaped like a goose. You're not paid to ask questions. Inside, the lady of the castle is seated with her handmaidens, surrounded by embroidery, books, and a dangerously unstable tea setup. You recognize one of the books as a volume on saints. The other appears to be a romance involving knights, mistaken identities, and multiple fainting episodes. You smile. She does not notice. You linger just long enough to overhear one of the handmaidens whisper that a marriage proposal is expected soon between the lady's niece and one of the noble visitors. You file that away under things that will probably cause drama. Later, you're sent up again, this time to inspect a dovecot near the tower's top. Pigeons are medieval email, carrying messages tied to their tiny feet. Your job? Check for messages. Clean out the mess. Try not to get pooped on. You fail the last part almost immediately. Inside the dovecot is chaos. Flapping wings, tiny feathers, and the smell of regret. You find 3 messages tied to bird legs. One is addressed to a nearby manor asking for more salt. One is a weather report, cloudy as expected. And one is a cryptic note that just says the wolf moves at dusk. You show it to the steward. He reads it, grunts, and says, "Probably poetry." You're unconvinced. At dusk, you're back on the parapet, watching the sky blush pink and gold. The castle glows in the fading light, its shadows stretching across the courtyard like sleepy arms. Below, fires are being lit, shutters close, and the guard's chains shift with a clink of mail and the shuffle of tired boots. A boy from the kitchens brings you a slab of barley bread and cheese. It's cold, but you devour it like a feast. You lean on the stone wall, full belly, aching arms, wind in your face. From up here, the castle looks invincible, solid, eternal. But you know the truth now. It's not just stone and iron. It's people. Tired people with chores and secrets and gooseberry pie cravings. As night falls, the stars blink into view, one by one. Below, a lute starts playing in the hall. Someone singing, badly but with feeling. A dog howls. The pigeons settle in for the night, dreams of messages and breadcrumbs in their tiny heads. You stay a little longer, letting the cool night air wrap around you like a blanket. Up here, even with the onion taste still lingering, everything feels peaceful. You're just a tiny part of this great, creaky machine. But for tonight, that's enough. The castle begins to quiet. Fires and hearths are doused or left to smolder into orange glows. The kitchens echo with the final clang of pots, and boots no longer stamp across the flagstones. You've been sent to assist with the last watch, the graveyard shift, as some call it, though graveyard might be a little on the nose considering the chapel crypt is just a few levels below you. Don't think about that. Tonight, you're not on the walls. You're patrolling the interior corridors, checking locks, trimming wicks, and gently nudging sleeping guards who've accidentally nodded off on staircases. It's not glamorous, but it's quieter, more still, as if the castle itself is trying to sleep, sighing beneath its stone skin. As you move through the halls, lantern in hand, your footsteps echo against the ancient masonry. You pass storerooms stacked with sacks of grain, baskets of apples, even a salted fish or 3. Mice scatter as your light approaches. One pauses, looks offended, and scurries off. You apologize out of reflex. In the solar, the lady's lapdog snores dramatically. In the chapel, the candlelight flickers against stained glass, casting blue and red ghosts across the flagstone floor. You pause here a moment, not because you're religious, but because it's one of the few places where nobody expects anything of you. You listen to the wind brushing against the stone and imagine the stained glass whispering secrets about saints and sinners, both long dead and not so different from yourself. Here's a mainstream fact for this moonlit moment. Many castles had chapels directly within their walls. Religion was as woven into daily life as bread and bed bugs. Lords needed spiritual legitimacy, and castles often housed relics, bones, teeth, or splinters of things someone once swore belonged to a saint. Pilgrims would visit, hoping for miracles or at least bragging rights. You leave the chapel and head toward the library. Library, being generous. It's really a single room with shelves of manuscripts and scrolls, mostly Latin, mostly unreadable to you. But still, there's something about the place. The scent of old ink, the crinkle of parchment, and a quiet that feels heavier than in the rest of the castle, as if the books are waiting for someone to ask them a question. Someone once told you that one of these scrolls describes a battle fought entirely over a misheard insult about a chicken. You believe it. You've met enough lords to know that's entirely plausible. In the scriptorium adjoining the library, you find a sleepy monk hunched over a text, ink smudging his fingertips. He nods at you and mutters something about spelling inconsistencies in St. Eustace's name. You nod solemnly, as if that means anything to you, and let him get back to battling vowels. Historians still argue whether most castle libraries were truly centers of learning or just decorative book-hoarding spots for showy nobles. This one seems a little of both, half scholarship, half status symbol, but it's beautiful all the same. You pass through a servant's hallway next, where earlier that day you overheard someone threaten to curse a butter churn. Now it's empty, save for a cat curled on a pile of linens. You scratch behind her ears. She allows it, which is a great honor, before yawning so wide you worry she'll swallow the hallway. From there, you climb up, again, to the top of the dungeon, the tallest tower, not for duty this time, but because you want to. There's something about seeing the castle from its highest point in the dead of night, a reminder where you are, what this place is. The stars are bright tonight, clear, cold, endless. The landscape below is barely visible, just dark shapes and distant lights. Some from farms, some maybe from will-o'-the-wisps if you're superstitious. And tonight, you sort of are. You sit on the cold stone ledge, careful not to lean too far, and you breathe. You think about how this castle has been here for decades, maybe centuries. About how many people have walked these halls before you. Cooks, knights, lords, traders. Lovers sneaking kisses in alcoves. Children hiding in barrels. Guards watching the same stars, thinking the same quiet thoughts. Here's your quirky tidbit. In one French castle, historians found graffiti from the 1300s carved into a dungeon wall. It was a drawing of a chicken, wearing a crown. No one knows why. You wonder what you'd carve if you had to leave a message for someone 100 years from now. Probably not a chicken. Maybe just, "We were here. We tried." Also, avoid the pickled onions. The wind bites at your cheeks. Below, the castle is still. A giant stone beast, breathing slow, holding its people like a ship at anchor. You feel oddly grateful for the cold, the quiet, and the ridiculous turns your life has taken since scrubbing your first scullery floor. You descend again, legs stiff, and make your way to the barracks to report the all clear. A sleepy guard waves you off. Your shift is over. No alarms. No fires. No attacking armies. Just another night survived. You return to your sleeping quarters, where the straw smells less offensive than usual. You peel off layers of wool and linen, settle beneath your blanket, and let the last bits of the night swirl in your head like smoke from the torches you just extinguished. And now, at last, it's time. The castle sleeps. The corridors are empty, the great hall dark, the kitchens resting at last from their daily storm. Outside, the wind moves gently through the arrow slits, stirring the banners on the battlements in soft, slow waves. The stars above shine cold and watchful, casting silver shadows across the roof tiles and window panes. Below, in the stables, the horses shift in their sleep. One lets out a heavy sigh, ears twitching at a distant owl. In the dovecot, the pigeons huddle close, feathers puffed and peaceful. No messages tonight, no alarms, just the creak of old beams and the hush of time gliding past. Even the mice in the storerooms are still, nestled in stolen wool and dreams of crumbs. And somewhere far above, in a drafty chamber of stone and straw, you drift with them, finally allowed to rest. The castle, with all its noise and work and worry, releases its hold for a little while. The weight of duty lifts. The clatter of pots, the clash of armor, the gossip and song, all fade into the distance, like the last notes of a lullaby whispered through the stone. You are safe. You are warm. You are exactly where you need to be. Let the torches burn low. Let the stars watch over you. Let your breath slow and your thoughts soften like silk on skin. Because in this moment, in this ancient place built by hands long turned to dust, you are part of something greater. A story, a home, a night worth remembering. Sleep well, castle dweller.